Hey everybody, starting a bit late, but I should be able to get the rest of this chapter done in one sitting. So we are back to the ship who sang. Dramatic mission. Others arrived as the news circulated that the X-ray Hotel 834 was being courted. In fact, Helva sent the lift back down as soon as the newest arrival stepped into the lock, so it wasn't surprising that Curlister could step into the lock without advance notice. Hey, don't gawk, girl. Come on in and take your chances with the rest of us, someone encouraged her. She's not competition, Bronze, Helva sang out. Let her through to the pilot's cabin, please. Curla raised one hand as if to protest, her face reflecting confusion and embarrassment. But before she could verbalize, she was pushed through the crowd and into the cabin. Nothing's happened to the Solar, Carla, Helva asked the moment the door was shut to the noise. Relief washed away the uncertainty as Curla cried, You do care about him! I respect Solar Parane as an artist and as a human being, Helva replied, choosing her words very carefully and wondering if Paralon were behind this visit. Then why did you refuse this assignment when he specifically asked for you? There was a shrill note to the girl's voice, although she was trying hard to speak evenly. I have not yet refused the assignment. Curla's lips tightened angrily. Then Answer Colmer has been able to keep your name off. I don't know anything about that, Curla. I have been approached, unofficially, and I was very flattered that Solar Parane asked for me, but I've also made it plain, unofficially, that I do not want another assignment with a temporary brawn. I don't understand. I thought it was interference from Colmer. That you didn't realize he wanted you. Don't you realize that there's not another ship that even knows who Shakespeare was, much less quotes him on cue? And he thought you might even like to play the nurse. He was honestly impressed with your reading on the way here. Why, you're so perfect, it's like an answer to an impossibility, and he's got to have the very best there is. It's got to be perfect. She fought to control her voice. It's just got to be perfect. Because it's the end for him. Curla seemed to crumple in on herself and sagged against the bulkhead, unbidden tears in her eyes. Oh, God spare me a woman's tears, Helva said, angry and annoyed. So it's his swan song, and you've decided that I'm the ship to sing it? Oh, please, if you've got a gram of humanity in you. Curla covered her tactless mouth with both hands, her eyes wide. Actually, about 22 kilos of me is very human, Curla. Oh, Helva, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I had no right to come here. I'm sorry. I thought if I could just explain. Awkwardly, she got to her feet, her muscles straining. I'd appreciate it if you forgot that I came here. Curla went on in a very stiff, formal voice, fumbling for the door release. It's always a mistake to act on impulse. Is it true that not one of the others knows Shakespeare? Well, I wouldn't demean myself with lies. So Antra is making it difficult. The pride seemed to drain out of Curla, and she leaned her head wearily against the door for a moment, defeat showing in every curve of her slender body. She implies the most despicable things about him. She said... Oh, never mind. But she's undermining him with the rest of the cast, and Helva, I don't trust her. Well, then have her replaced, you little idiot. Me? What could I do? I'm a medical attendant. Curla, the man is dying. You can't be deluding yourself about that. No, that's one delusion I don't have. Something seemed to pull the girl erect then. I just don't want him cheated out of this last perfect performance. His acting is all that he has left, and he's so good at it. You've got influence on him, though. Get him to replace Ansra. Curla shook her head sadly. He won't, because he believes that she's the best Juliet available, so we'll put up with her temperament. And... Curla hesitated, the struggle with honesty apparent in her expressive face. She was, when they rehearsed back on tour. Then she changed, overnight. Prane won't do anything, and she'll destroy him, Alva. I know it. Somehow she'll destroy him. Not while I have my eye on her, she won't, Helva replied firmly. Oh, thank you. You have a very artistic fart. Dog. Good God, dog. Stop! You were laying down in the other room and you came over just to fart on me. Why would you do this to me? I thought you loved me. Oh, you stink. Oh, I love you so much. You stink so much. Ah. The speed with which Shedras Turo arrived afterwards struck Helva as suspicious, but she knew Kurla's visit had not been planned by Paralon, and she liked Shedras. He could not have been retired very long, for his step was springy, and an old, unaltered jumpsuit outlined a strong, muscular body. He wore a clutch of achievement stars, but no honors, which meant that he had plenty, but he was no braggart. Welcome aboard, Shadras Turo of Marak. It's nice to have a partner, however briefly. Shadras caught the caustic undertone. I hope I'm not the cause of your regrets. No, you're the first happy face I've seen in the last 2 hours. You've been put into Coventry by the brains, and I had to be smuggled aboard to avoid outraged bronze. Oh, they'll all forget their peak. They always do. However, officially, you are in very good odor. Supervisor Paralon is taking personal credit for convincing you to accept. Oh, the nerve of that pipsqueak. I thought so, laughed Shadras. Well, no matter. I'm not the only one who thought you'd be the only ship to do the job right. But I've only rumors and legends to go by. But it's going to be a tricky mission with so much at stake and so many explosive, personalities. I've met many actors. I'm a classical buff myself. That's why I was called back. He paused, his eyes seeing at middle distance a slight frown on his face. In fact, I leapt at the opportunity. Some of us should be allowed to die in the harness. No matter. Well, here's the mission tape. He dropped it in the slot, and before he touched the playback switch, he closed the lock and turned off all but the console audio. Then he eased into the pilot's chair and settled himself in to listen. Helva was amazed at how much of the tape's information she knew. The Neckarese command had most of it correct. A survey ship on a routine mission had intercepted pulsed energy emissions of tremendous power near Beta Corvi. They tracked the emissions to the sixth planet, a methane-ammonia giant, and assumed an orbit. Before they could penetrate probes for exploration in such a corrosive atmosphere, they were contacted by the Korviki. It felt like pressure, as if a giant hand were covering my head and pressing knowledge into my brain, was the taped comment of the survey ship captain. This unusual form of communication was nevertheless precise enough for the Korviki to grasp the nature of their unexpected visitors and to discover a commodity of which they, unimaginably sophisticated scientifically, wanted. I guess the best analogy, the captain of the ship went on, is that of the pure researcher who has devoted half a century to an intensive study of some esoteric subject. He masters it, and has finally had time to look around him, and he discovers other things exist. Like girls. The captain snickered. And sex. He understands the theory, but not the application, and he sure wants to learn. Romeo and Juliet was a sample of the merchandise that had aroused the Korviki curiosity. If acceptable, the human company would teach understudies the full play, with movement adapted for the free-fall conditions of Beta Corvi. Payment would be a Korviki process of stabilizing certain isotopes in the transuranium group, whose power potential was unrealizable due to an exceedingly short half-life. Central Worlds badly needed such a process, and the X-Ray Hotel 834 was to ensure the success of this dramatic mission. Ha! Title drop. Well, we'll give it the old homeworld try, Helva said. You don't sound so sure. It all sounds too simple. For instance, this psyche transfer. How do we know it won't develop some unexpected snag and leave our people trapped down there in Korviki envelopes? That's one reason we're equipping you with an override and a time control. Well, suppose the Korviki override me because they adore Colmer's Juliet. Shadras grinned at the notion, but threw the schematic picture of the transceiver circuitry onto the pilot's console. Every EEG expert in the galaxy has had a go at these. There are no extraneous circuits, nothing that is not unaccounted for in the schematics. I'm rubbing Opal's belly, and she is licking the carpet in happiness. Furthermore, we manufactured them, not the Corvigi. Now, they do specify that 7 hours is the endurance limit of our life form. Aha! I'll cool it. The transceiver has a time control set for the maximum 7 hours, our time, so nothing could happen. After the maximum period, what happens to the personality if... Oh, don't invent problems. We've got enough. However, I did speak to the survey ship captain, and he was most encouraging about the transfer. In fact, he said it was perfect for a bunch of actors. You think that you want to be on the surface, or you think that you want to be on the surface of the planet, and you are. No pain, no strain. Simplicity itself. Simplicity has a habit of expanding into catastrophe. Shedress called her a pessimist and went on with the briefing. She thought of a half-dozen factors that could alter disastrously betwixt here and Beta Corvi, the least of which was ringing in an unknown device. The adjustment to be attached to herself was even simpler, even ingenious, she admitted, examining the compact device under microscopic lenses. It would link several infinitesimal strands already embedded in her cerebrum, one which extended deep into the area controlling the optic nerves, for the psyche transfer was triggered by this portion of the human brain. The other two were to link crossover reflexes that would enable her to time and to disconnect the psyche relay for the rest of the mobiles. All 3 synapse attachments were self-activating and did not appear on the pilot's board. The hookup had to be made with Helva under anesthesia, and she disliked that part intensely. It was unnerving for her to hear the chief of Regulus Base, no less, mouth the pitched syllables that triggered the panel that was the only access to her shell behind the titanium column. It seemed she hovered in an eternity of vulnerability before he touched the anesthesia release. She instinctively struggled against the unconsciousness. Was that how poor 732 had felt? Or had her madness banished the fear? Helva's thought was no sooner formulated than she was conscious again. Startled, she gazed into an empty cabin, irritated that Chief Riley dared leave her unprotected. Then she was aware that considerable time had elapsed since the chief had spoken. 18 hours, 20 minutes, and 32 seconds to be precise. Oh, well, I can't drop my chair back now that you've locked it. Here we go. Have you. Okay. Awake again, Helva. And Shedress stepped into her lock. I say, they certainly timed it to the exact second. I'm to ask if you have a headache? Headache? How could I? I have no pain reflexes. Then she looked around her main cabin, where transceivers had been stowed by her couches, and wall units had been added to accommodate the additional personnel. Bunks had been added to all her cabins, and another table fitted into the pilot's cabin. I'm a ready troop ship. Indeed you are, Shedress agreed, and the troop is assembling. Pun! 5 men ascended in the lift and were introduced by Shedress, but she found it easier to think of them as the parts that they would play. The introductions were cut short by sirens and the advent of a fleet of ground vehicles. Ansras made the scene, the man who played Prince Aeschylus announced in a dry voice. No one seemed sorry when Shedress refused any boarders, including Chief Riley. As he took the restriction in good part, the others had to, and Ansra was reduced to waving and smiling at her admirers as she was lifted smoothly lockward. "Here I am again, Helva," she said, in a bright, glad way that certainly didn't deceive Helva. "Welcome aboard, Miss Colmer." You feed me the cue, Helva thought to herself, and I'll read the appropriate line. Immediately, Central Comm, and it wasn't Niall Parallon's voice, gave her clearance for the orbital station. The shuttle run was fast, and in no time, Helva was at the freefall lock. The scene was reminiscent of the Dur landing. Davo, Solar Prane, and Kurla, the central figures of a smiling cluster. But here the whole cluster entered, all of them floating with excellent control in the cabin, pushing down to the couches and securing themselves for maneuver and acceleration. There was neither wasted time nor motion. Prane looked so gay and alert that Helva glanced at Kurla, whose attitude would transmit a truer reflection of her patient's health. The girl was radiant, her eyes as bright as Prane's, her manner proud and confident. She managed a polite nod to Ansra, who smiled fixedly at everyone. By contrast, Davo looked tired and thoughtful. He pushed immediately towards the sleeping accommodations and meshed himself into a bunk. Prane hovered in front of Helva. I want to thank you very much for putting aside your personal preferences to undertake this venture. Chief Riley has assured me that you will have the topmost priority when you return. Helva did not have time to analyze why his words disturbed her, for the orbital station transmitted good luck and clearance. Shadrus did the manual piloting, that was the protocol. But Helva was so used to doing things herself, it was hard to watch. Not that he was inept. Oh, damn, she thought, glancing around her crowded cabin, wishing half her mind were busy on something routine. How had she let herself get talked into this? The moment Shadrus announced turnover and freefall, Prane called a rehearsal. First, he put the 5 men who had joined the ship planetside through the staging that they had missed. They'd all worked in freefall, and they knew their roles. All they required was time to familiarize themselves with movements, and the nurse's voice issuing from the wall. Ansra, however, chose to be difficult about that. She undulated towards the director. Whether to charm him or intimidate him was a question. Really, Prane, I can project any emotion required of any capable actress, but to pretend an abstract voice as Juliet's nurse is the end. How can I play to a wall, and how, may I ask, can Helva, it seemed to be difficult for Ansra to name her, acquire any ease in freefall when I understand that she's never made use of a body? No one actually laughed out loud at the put-down. Ansra resumed her proper position, frowning and chewing her lip. However, her assertion that she could project any emotion required of any capable actress seemed to fall short of the mark in scenes with proper actors. Her Juliet remained wooden and inadequate. She did not take fire from Romeo's speeches, although how she could fail was beyond Helva's comprehension. The man was inspired and inspiring. Relieved now for many days of the press of gravity on his spongy bones, buoyed constantly by the success of every other aspect of this singular production, Prane exuded a vitality and enthusiasm that was contagious. He was apparently indefatigable. As he was setting scene 4 of Act 1 with himself, Mercutio, Benvolio, and the others doubling up as maskers and torchbearers, Mercutio finished his speech. "Come, we burn daylight, ho!" The scene had been quick. Bright exchanges, the light-hearted nonsense of friends bound for a gay evening. Mercutio repeated his line. Hastily, Helva remembered that she doubled as a prompter and found the place. "Nay, that's not so," she read out. Silence met this attempt, so she, too, repeated the line. "We know the line," Prane said, as this additional pause lengthened conspicuously. "Who says it?" You do." For a moment, a terrible expression haunted his eyes. Then he burst out laughing, and the terror was gone. "'Tis always the littlest line that escapes." And he briskly cued Mercutio. That night, as everyone slept, Prane was restless. Shamelessly, Helva turned up the volume in his cabin. In the cabin he shared with 5 other men. He was repeating scene 4 over and over. Then he lay silent. Helva thought he slept until she saw his right hand slowly creep to his belt, carefully extract a small pill from his waistband fabric of his ship suit. With a gesture counterfeiting a random sleepy movement, the pill reached his mouth. The secretiveness of this action, added to the intense rehearsal of that scene, gave Helva a tragic insight to the Solar. He was an addict in the most horrifying degree. Mind Trap, listed as harmless in the Galactic Pharmacopoeia, had become poisonous to him, fatal to mind and body, and he knew it. Yet, more devastating to Solar Prane was the loss of memory, and to prevent that, he courted self-destruction. Except for Ansra, rehearsals proceeded well. How Prane kept his temper with such deliberate obstructionism, Helva did not know. Every scene the Solara played began to sag, lose fire, drop pace, but Prane did not react. and Ansra apparently gave up trying to goad him into an action that no one could condone. She took to needling Kurla a far more vulnerable personality. Fortunately, Naya Tubb, the Lady Capulet, shared the pilot's cabin, which was the women's room, and she was wise in the ways of human relations, and if she said nothing to the point, she did buffer Kurla from Ansra's hostility. She also helped Kurla in her lines, kept up a light-hearted monologue when the women were alone, but even she could see that Ansra's tactics increasing the pressure on the sensitive, anxious medical attendant. "Honey, you have any real trouble with Colmer, you let me help, huh?" Naya Tubb said to Kurla one morning. "Thanks," Kurla answered with a wan smile. "Say, just between the two of us, Prain's no addict, is he? He doesn't look like one, and I've seen enough to know, but still." Solar Prain developed an adverse chemical reaction to long use of Mind Trap. "I always thought Mind Trap was the most harmless thing in the world. I've used it myself times without number." "Ordinarily, but the Solar has been using it for over 70 years. A residue of the silicon content, which ought to have been flushed out of his system, has built up in his tissues. He also has liquid retention problems, and the diuretic originally prescribed combined unfavorably with the Mind Trap residue, leaching potassium out of his system in an unremediable process." "What does that mean? He looks fine to me." Kurla's voice, dispassionately clinical, was more tragic than tears. "In low-grav conditions, in free fall particularly, there is no strain on the skeleton and he's fine, but his bones are soft. A fall, a blow, any long period of heavy physical strain, he would, in effect, he would break up, and the silicon is gradually choking his vital organs to death." "Well, replace him." Kurla shook her head, and Nia patted her hand sympathetically. Helva interrupted them with a rehearsal call. And that was the worst rehearsal yet. Ansra's attitude had insidiously undermined the entire cast. Everyone was off. They blew their lines, forgot stage business. When Mercutio and Paris got into a fight that was not in the script, Prain called a halt. "We've gone stale. We'll take today off, and tomorrow... Helva, break out the liquor rations. Nia and Kurla, would you be kind enough to see what surprises the galley might serve us? Helva, have you got any tricasts of interest? We need to relate to everyday worlds that we have forgotten, immersed as we have gotten in ancient England." Ansra stalked out of the main cabin, slamming the door to the women's quarters. Helva looked in to find her staring angrily into a mirror. It was disconcerting for Helva to watch her frustrated, brooding self-examination, while Nia and Kurla chattered inconsequentialities in the galley. Helva tried to be everywhere, keeping an ear out for any more trouble, that is. Davo floated purposefully towards Prain. Since Helva had begun speaking only from the main cabin, she fostered the tendency for her passengers to forget that she had ears and eyes everywhere in the ship. "You must realize by now, Prain," Davo was saying, "that Ansra is determined to ruin this production, and she is succeeding admirably." Prain regarded his friend for a long moment, a slow smile beginning. "You've a solution?" "Let's pull her off balance. Remember what we used to do on the long hauls on tour?" "Reshuffle all the parts." "Exactly. Gods, we all know each other's lines and movements." Prain began to grin mischievously. "And let Helva be Juliet?" "No, Kurla. Kurla is Juliet." Davo returned Prain's surprised stare with a dead serious dare. "And Romeo?" "Oh, that need not change," Davo said evenly, then adding in a light voice, "But I shall be the Friar Lawrence and marry you two." Prain waited till everyone had eaten and was relaxed with Thracian beer. "Greek beer! Space Greek beer!" The announcement met with approval raucous in body. "I'll be Lady Capulet," Aeschylus announced in a squeaky falsetto. "And I'll be Lady Montague, said Friar Lawrence, in a quavering contralto, reverting to his own normal bass to add, always thought she was a wino. I'll be Aeschylus, Helva volunteered in a voice so like the real actors that the man dropped his tankard. You could be a whole damn play all by yourself, Davo vowed, his voice far more slurred than it should be on Thracian beer. There isn't one part you couldn't do. Huh. Really? In that case, I'll be the nurse, Ansra Colmer announced. Then Helva can see how the part should be played. And Kurla will be Juliet, Davo cried, his eyes on Ansra. Set the stage, O chorus. Places, everyone, places! Two households, both alike in dignity, Helva began promptly in a basso, sweeping everyone into the act before they had time for second thoughts. Davo came on as Samson and Shadras, normally Lord Capulet, as Gregory, hamming their lines and indulging in slapstick nonsense. Balthazar rolled on as though drunk, slurring through the establishment of conflict between the two houses. Lines were rattled off, and actors bodily moved each other into proper stage positions, or deliberately upstaged the speaker. When Aeschylus Lady Capulet glided onto the glided on in the company of Nurse Angelica, Ansra, with deliberate malice, dispensed with fun and played her part, as she had not played Juliet, and somehow twisted her lines as nurse to mean something entirely different. Her exit line, "Go, girl, see happy nights to happy days," was barbed enough to make Aeschylus falter. But then Juliet met Romeo at the feast, and Ansra's spitefulness backfired, for Prain was a different, tender Romeo. His voice trembled not with fatigue, but with newfound love, gentle, protective, and eager, and Kurla, her eyes equally discovering her lover, was Juliet, breathless, shy, daring, and precious. She blushed shyly as she said, "For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy Palmer's kiss." She turned her hands palms down on Romeo's, as he had so often directed Ansra, only to have her mistime the words in action to make them meaningless. Romeo raised Juliet's hands on his, and the ardor in his eyes, the answering joy in hers, made that little scene so tender that everyone was spellbound. "Thus from my lips, by thine, my sin is purged," said Romeo. In a soft voice, it seemed a faint echo, but it hung clearly until his lips met Juliet's in a kiss that was as devout an avowal as a shout. Her role forgotten completely, Ansra flung herself towards the two, still embraced and lost to their surroundings, and the proximity alarms twanged. They'd arrived at their destination. "Now," Shadras said to the actors, all seated in the main cabin, hastily cleared of all its party debris, "the transceivers are fitted to your heads. The transceivers were fitted to your head sizes, so they will be quite comfortable. You all heard the report from those survey ship members who used the first device. You know the transfer process is painless and easy. You think yourself on the surface, and there you are." "How can you think yourself on a surface when you've never been?" Nea demanded, grimacing at the transceiver that she was holding. "The nearest analog would be undersea scapes on Terra in the Caribbean area, or the waterworld of Aldebaran, or Vega 4. Imagine yourselves surrounded by seaweeds, all shapes and colors." Yes, the survey people repeatedly emphasized the enormous importance of color. The Corviki resemble a marine animal in the class Hydrozoa, sort of a large sac-like body with a complex collection of tendrils that may be nerve endings. And again, I forget whether that's anemones or starfish. I think it's starfish. "God, what a costume," Neatub muttered, shuddering. "It'll fit, I'm told," Shadras grinned at her. "Now, Helva is our failsafe. She's equipped with an automatic return relay. We've been warned not to remain too long in the Corviki environment." "Why?" Ansra demanded in a bored voice. "The Corviki undoubtedly have a good reason, but they did not say what. Now, Prain." The Solar rose, looked around at the entire cast. We all know the importance of this unlikely exchange of Shakespeare for power. The bard has been translated into every conceivable language, alien and humanoid, and somehow the essence of his plays has been understood by the most exotic, the most barbaric, and the most sophisticated. There is no reason to suppose that Will Shakespeare hasn't got something to say to the Korviki. If we do the job wholeheartedly, or whatever our Korviki envelopes use for that particular organ. Ladies and gentlemen, curtain. He sat down and donned his transceiver, settling back in the couch, and relaxed completely. In a few seconds, a light glowed across the rim of the transceiver. If that's all there is to it, Neatub said, and pulled hers down over her head. The others imitated her move more or less simultaneously until only Shadress and Helva remained on board. Check Prain, Helva said. Well, he's all right as far as I can see. I'll see you down there, Helva. And he was gone. Helva had the uncanny notion that the new synapse leads were burning hot, but that was impossible. She willed herself to ascend, on the heels of the thought that this was the first time that she had been outside of a shell in her entire life. Came a terrifying surge of primitive fear, and then transfer. Her first indication of the difference involved pressure, an enveloping pressure. But the Korviki had said that they would provide empty envelopes for the cast to occupy. She was enveloped, and the envelope was also enveloped. She was enveloped, and the envelope was also enveloped. Ah, what a hecking sentence. She could feel it all around. She undulated experimentally, hoping to rid herself of this sense of being covered. It was somehow unclean to feel all along every part of her, and yet even as she felt loose, she was at the same time compressed. Not gravity pressure, but something in which she was moving. Well, movement was not a new skill for her. This was then just a form of motion. She wriggled again, and the things that were part of her floated up from beneath her. She could not look at them because they floated away when she tried. She could see every part of her ship self from one scanner or another. How limiting mobility was. Well, she'd look around as far as she was able, and started down, in an unlimited perspective until finally her sight distinguished a burbling, burping mass of ochre eruptions that she recognized as ground. Above and around her, fronds swayed, exhaled, and inhaled in a full spectrum of colors, unbelievably varied and varying. Colors which in some cases had sound and smell as part of their value. Only smell was also a novel sensation to Helva, who had utilized gauges all her life instead of an olfactory sense. Adapting Helva, a familiar presence dominated her mind. Instinctively, she turned towards the sound that wasn't sound as she'd previously known it, but a patterned interruption of the pressures around her. It's odd to feel physical sensations, she replied. Well, it would be for you. How do you feel, Shadress? For the presence was indisputably her brawn. Velvet, soft, deep, a very pleasurable tactile sensation, I assure you, and a sense of unlimited power. Itty bitty living space. Shadress was impressed. Of being young and new again. Here the dominant quality of his thought was incredulous and self-amused. They have evidently lent us brand new, guaranteed, unsullied shells. I wonder where they got them from. A new dominance approached them, and this entity was recognized by both as being true Korviki. The presence was very dense, and Shadress and Helva both received an undeniable feeling of great age and wisdom, of a unique application of basic energy. I am your manager, he introduced himself. The others are all contained. We may proceed with this expression of energy. That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, thought Helva as they propelled themselves towards a sphere-shaped area surrounded by unanchored clumps of dead black substance framed by enormous breathing fronds, and suddenly she could recognize everyone, despite their apparently homogeneous shape, by the slight variation of color and tone and pressure weight. Prain came on as dense as manager, Halva discovered. She began to equate density with age or wisdom. Subjectively, she wondered how she felt to the others. Then, Prain called her as chorus to open the rehearsal. For a frantic moment, she wondered how she could possibly project chorus without the audio equipment available on the ship. She had an intense desire to retreat back to her own shell again. But Prain was director, and one obeyed director. Two households alike in dignity, and somehow her dominance enlarged, darkened, and she was more than herself. Then Samson and Gregory emerged from behind fronds, and their dominance was shallow, light, tenuous, as if inconsequential. In a fashion the cast managed to condense or dissipate themselves through the scenes until, by Act 4, the new medium and the difference of exposition no longer seemed strange. It was almost physically painful to be wrenched by the time control back into the ship and discover that they were, sadly, only flesh and blood. No one said much. They ate a great deal quickly and then went to bed. Helva, unfortunately, was wide awake and, for the first time in her conscious life, envied the others for the gentle oblivion of sleep. She tried not to think of the experiential effect of mobility on her conditioning. She disciplined herself by running a full scan outside, not because anything might have changed, but just to make sure that all was as before. They were in orbit, black space topside, but the amorphous, boiling cloud of diffuse colors shot with brilliant lights loomed below. She ran a check on her systems and discovered something a little unnerving in her engine compartment. There was something blocking her readings there, yet the systems were all green on the boards. She could not feel power, although there was no evidence of its absence. It was simply unavailable to her. As she pondered the implications of this, she heard a faint susurrus. She snatched at the diversion and traced it, praying at his litany. If by your art, my dearest father, you have put the wild waters in this roar, allay them. She listened avidly until the sleepy voice trailed into silence after. As you from crimes would pardoned be, let your indulgence set me free. They picked up the staging the next day where they had left off. Helva had the feeling none of the Korviki had left the stage, or were even aware that the troupe had been away. Did they control time as well as energy? Was time, as one Alfecan theoretician maintained, merely another emission of energy? Her perceptions were more acute today. She had more control over her envelope and the sensory data it constantly received, and while the others were beginning to act, Ansara was consciously damping down. Manager approached Ansara in front of all, just before time was up. There is no logical reason to withhold energy. Conservation is not the aim of this experiment. We are assessing the effects of this form of energy expulsion on the pressure senses and dominance factors. You inhibit this experiment. Therefore, lose energy as equitative factors require. Or, a ripple of pressure and color answered Ansar's ultimatum, the envelope will be permanently emptied. I will not go back to that perverted seascape to be insulted and degraded in public, Ansar declared. She was rather magnificent, Helva thought, even if she left her audience unmoved. That is sufficient, Ansar Colmer, Prain said quietly, rising from the couch. His voice was glacial, his eyes stony, his attitude unbending. You have made your personal preferences and private opinions known to each and every member of this cast. However, there is more at stake than the personal differences, and everyone here has been exceedingly forbearing with your whimsies and little schemes. You will go back tomorrow, and you will, as you were advised by the manager, lose energy as the equitative factors required. Who's going to make me? Ansar struck a pose with that challenge. Any of us, honey, Nia Tubb replied, forestalling Shudressa and Davo, who began to rise from their seats. Any one of us would be glad to make you. In fact, you might find that when we got through with you here, that it would be a relief to get into that Korviki envelope. You wouldn't dare! Helva wondered whether Ansra, having taken a stand, was too hard-hearted to retreat, or unable to believe that one of her standing could be viable. Fortunately, she was also a person who could not tolerate physical pain, and a half-dozen open-handed blows from Nia were an effective proof and promise. "Oh, no, you don't, honey," Nia cried, grabbing Ansra's arm as the sobbing woman headed for the cabin. "You're not coming from my side, because I don't trust you out of my sight. Now you sit down and you'll eat and you'll behave, and tomorrow you will be the best Juliet that's ever trod air." That scene, on top of the psychological exhaustion of rehearsing on Beta Corvi, drained everyone's reserve. Shadress and Kurla passed around liquor bulbs and high-protein soup. As soon as they ate, people drifted off to their bunks and meshed in. "Keep Nia and Ansra under observation, Helva, will you?" Shadress suggested. There's something different about him, Helva realized. A new depth, oddly Corvikian. "Do you think she'll play now?" Helva heard Kurla asking Prain. The two were at the last awake and seemed unable to separate. The color was that of anger-fear composite. Prain stopped short, staring down at Kurla. "You're thinking in Corviki," she laughed, her eyes dancing. "It's contagious, isn't it? Like assuming the characteristics of the part you're playing. See, even a rank amateur like me picks up the tricks of the trade." "You transfer into a very solid, warm presence on Corvi, my dear." The laughter caught in her throat, and her eyes were filled with haunted yearning. They seemed to be a breath away from a kiss when Prain, a garbled sound issuing from his throat, whirled away down the corridor. Ansra lost energy the next rehearsal with such goodwill that they were able to run completely through the play. Prain was so pleased with the result that he informed the manager that they would give the first complete performance. Or that they could give the first complete performance. "My energy group is excited to experience the total pressure dominances of these envelopes," the manager replied, emanating the lavender purples that Helva equated with pleasure in Corviki. "Your next entry here is convenient." Prain agreed heartily. If this emission is satisfactory, Shatris asked, shading his dominance with the sharply controlled waste of deference to a superior force. "Will Corviki entities then undertake a transfer of our patterns so we may fulfill our contract with you?" "Affirmative, for it is evident that there is a loss of ego entity superior to the programmed minimum. Entropy could exceed basic energy requirements." Helva felt she'd better analyze that statement the moment she returned it to herself. It sounded ominous to Helva, but not to her imprinted self in the Corviki envelope. Such a split of personality could be very dangerous indeed. Once back on the ship, it was easier to spot those who were psychologically twisting their orientation. They tended to express themselves in Corviki terms, as Prain and Shadress had the night before. The only one who seemed impervious was Ansra, but then Ansra was so wrapped up in her own personal grievances that she had no energy. "There I go," groaned Helva, for objective experiences. Opening night on Beta Corviki was a white-hot, frenetic triumph as far as the Corviki acceptance of this form of energy loss was concerned. Beyond the stand of fronds were masses of Corviki, pulsing, throbbing as they absorbed the cast's emissions, to all appearances starved for this form of energy. Helva could feel her Corviki envelope swell to incredible dimensions as the feedback resulted in thermal reaction, giving her an unlimited mass to energize to a high excitation level. Yet she was also aware that the Corviki audience understood the conflict of the two warring energy groups, of the desire of the two new, but not shallow entities, to combine into a new force group, of the energy stoking of herself as the nurse, of the brilliant light of beta particles exchanged by the two new entities, swearing neutron coalitions, and, finally, forced to expend the vital energy of their cores to bring the warring groups to the realization that coexistence was possible on their energy level. As the prince summed up the entropy death of the two, novas of approval exploded outside of the fronded area, and Helva, gross with feedback, found herself racing to emit into the nearest drained entity some ergs of that pressure in a self-sacrifice that was ecstatic. All around her, the atmosphere crackled, popped, boomed, and thundered with the resultant explosions as immeasurable positive forces recombined and all the previous energy expended was reabsorbed. Then, indeed, did Helva bless the exsurgents, bless and curse them for hauling her inexorably back from such a glorious intercourse. She dazedly recalled her scattered wits, as warning lights and signals penetrated the coruscating impressions and forced her to be aware of imminent danger. Lax figures lay, lifeless puppets with no more sign of vitality than the slight raise and falls of their chests. Scared, Helva tripped the transceivers. Lights reluctantly faded on the transceivers, and still no one stirred. It seemed an eternity to Helva before Ansra moaned. "Ansra! Ansra!" Helva called in an insistent, hard voice, hoping to penetrate the woman's trance-like state. "Ansra! Ansra!" "What?" "Get to the galley. Get stimulant K in the blue IV spray." It was like moving a robot. She kept droning her orders, relentlessly forcing Ansra to obey. The woman's eyes blinked, her body jerked as Helva encouraged, ordered, demanded the necessary actions. Finally, she got Ansra's hands around the right IV and got the uncoordinated body to depress the dermospray against her arm. The stimulant took effect. "Oh my god! Oh my god!" she muttered hoarsely. "Oh my god! Oh my god!" "Ansra, give them all injections. Move, woman, move!" The actress was still little better than an automaton, so Helva took advantage of her willlessness to make her give Kurla and Prain the first injections. Then Shadress. It was a stunned group who returned to their former bodies. "I don't think I can go back there," Aeschylus told Prain in a hoarse tremolo. He put both hands to his temples, where the receiver had left a red band. "Never thought to see the day when I couldn't face an audience because they liked me too much. But man, that place is... His eyes widened with a terror he had mastered. I almost said pure entropy, and he laughed. "But that's what's wrong with it all." Prain, looking as drained and haunted as the others, managed a weak smile. "There is no question that we have been overwhelmed by unpredictable reactions. At this moment," and he paused to emphasize the phrase, I would find a return engagement inconceivable." "Inconceivable!" No discussion now. We need to convert in the parlance of our hosts, we need to convert mass into much-needed energy and to conserve our emissions. But I want to say how very, very proud I am of you all." It was as well, Helva knew, for the cast could not have accepted in their present enervation the devastating truth of their captivity. The silence of the ship was unbroken, even by Prain's nightly litany. Helva, too, found herself close to the verge of unconsciousness, too fatigued to worry about the problems of the morrow. Alright, so we are at 152 of 172. And we are 48 minutes in. So, where's the next break point? Oh, 10 pages. I think, oh, best beloved, as much as I wanted to get 3 chapters cut down to 2, I think it would be wise for me to save my voice and finish it off tomorrow. So, you have more important things to do than listen to me. So, get some rest and do your best to become somebody that you can be proud of. And if people can hate without knowing you, then I can love you for exactly the same reason. So, I love you very much, and get some sleep. Good night, dear.